All right, I will start with my prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadadi Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। नमः ओं विष्णुपदाय कृष्ण प्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी निधि नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। Okay, so welcome devotees to the morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we will be discussing Canto 3, Chapter 14, texts 15 and 16. I'll share my screen. Okay, I will first read the verses, both 15 and 16. They have short purports, and then we'll discuss a little bit on them. अथ मे कुरु कल्याणं कामं कमललोचन आर्तोपसर्पणं भूमन् अमोघं हि महीयसी. Synonyms of the word to word meanings. Atha, therefore, me, unto me, kuru, kindly do, kalyanam, benediction, kamam, desire, kamala lochana, O lotus-eyed one, artha, of the distressed, upasarpanam, the approaching, bhuman, O great one, amogham, without failure. He certainly mahi yasi, to a great person. Translation by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. O lotus-eyed one, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his pleas should never go in vain. Purport. Diti knew well that her request might be rejected because of the untimely situation, but she pleaded that when there is an emergency or a distressful condition, there is no consideration of time or situation. Text 16. इति तां वीरमारिचः कृपणां बहुभाषिणीं प्रत्याहानुनयं वाचा प्रवृद्धा Nangakashmalam. Synonyms. Iti, thus, tam, unto her, Veera, O hero, Maricha, the son of Marichi or Kashyapa, Kripanam, unto the poor, Bahu Bhashinim, too talkative. Pratyaha replied, Anunayan, pacifying, Vacha, by words, Pravriddha, highly agitated, Ananga, lust, Kashmalam, contaminated. Translation: O hero, Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Purport: when a man or woman is afflicted by the lust of sex desire, it is to be understood as sinful contamination. Kashyapa was engaged in his spiritual activities, but he did not have sufficient strength to refuse his wife, who was thus afflicted. He could have refused her with strong words expressing impossibility, but he was not as spiritually strong as Vidura. Vidura is addressed here as a hero because no one is stronger in self control than a devotee of the Lord. It appears that Kashyapa was already inclined to have sexual enjoyment with his wife, and because he was not a strong man, he tried to dissuade her only with pacifying words. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadadi Swapadantikam. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. When will Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who has established within this material world the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? Okay, so we will discuss the two verses here. The discussion will be in three categories. As we see in the two texts, the three categories are, it's mentioned, afflicted by contamination of lust, number one. Number two, in verse number 16, it describes Diti as poor and talkative. And in the same verse, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about Kashyapa Muni, saying that he is not as strong as Vidura, because only a devotee can be strong enough. So Kashyap, difference between Kashyapa and a pure devotee. So starting with the first one, afflicted by contamination of lust. In the Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrita, Srila Rupa Goswami, he writes about this in the Upastha Vegam or Kama Veg. So Kama Veg or Kama is a universal phenomena, and generally in the material world, Kama is victorious. That is the general phenomena or the general characteristic of Kama. And we will see in this discussion what, and that's the difference that Srila Prabhupada is talking about between Kashyapa and Vidura, or a devotee. It is said that Kamadev, or in English also called the Cupid, the inflicting this Kamaveg is the duty, is the not the duty, is the function of Kamadev, and that is the nature of this world also. The urge he produces, or the Kamaveg, is to be restricted. Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada writes in his Upadeshamrita, Etan Vegan Yo Vishaheta Dhiraha. One who restricts these Vega is to be known as a Dhira, or a sober person. So this Kamaveg is to be restricted, and to further understand a little bit, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he talks about regarding the same verse of Upadeshamrita. He says that there are two types of Kama. One is Vedi and the other is Avedi, meaning one is according to the scriptures and the other Avedi is not according to the scriptures or something that is not allowed. So we will look at the Vedi one, and we will not go into what he defines as Avedi because that's not the topic for today's discussion. So for Vedi, he says that there are four characteristics, and they are: the number one, the person should have attained a proper age, and that is youth or beyond. Second is one who understands the directions of the Shastra or of the scriptures. And generally, after attaining youth, in the general principle, the student, they go through the studies, typically in a Gurukul or somewhere, they go through the study of the scriptures. So by the time they reach the youth, they understand the scriptures or the directions of the Shastra. The third one is universal, and that is it should be had with one's spouse only in all cases. And fourth one is at a prescribed time in the night. So these are the vidhi he's or according to the scriptures defined by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So according to the fourth one, it says that the prescribed time is at night time, and morning, afternoon, evenings are prohibited. And this is the context of the discussion or the part that we are discussing, where Diti is approaching her husband, Kashyapa Muni, at a non-prescribed time. Next is, we will talk about Srila Prabhupada talks, in the translation of the 16th verse, it says that Diti being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Poor and talkative, and poor and talkative is basically not. This is also mentioned in the Nectar of Instruction, verse number 2, where Prajalpa is mentioned, and Srila Prabhupada in his purport, he talks about what kind of talking is to be is encouraged, or what type of talking is to be prohibited. And he talks about the talking of the material world. He compares it to the croaking toads. Croaking toads means that the frogs, they also croak, and only thing that happens or is the result of their croaking is that the snakes and other animals around them, or who may be the enemies of the toads or the frogs, they'll come find them and eat them. So this is the unnecessary talking, which is mentioned in Upadeshamrita, Nectar of Instruction, as Prajalpa. Here we see that Diti is also, it's mentioned that, and therefore poor and talking. And the relationship is that Diti being thus afflicted by contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative. And Prabhupada writes in the purport that when a man or woman is afflicted by the lust of sex desire, it is to be understood as sinful contamination. So he's using the word contamination, meaning that, and contamination is always material, because in spiritual identity or in the spiritual world, there is no concept of contamination. Contamination itself means material contamination. So this material contamination is understood as sinful. Sinful meaning against the regulative principles or against the injunctions of the scriptures. And injunctions of the scriptures are to make a person progress in their spiritual life. And when we say they are sinful, it means that they are against the progress of the spiritual life. So when one is afflicted by the lust of sex desire, it means that the contamination is increased. The next sentence he writes, Kashyapa was engaged in his spiritual activities, but he did not have sufficient strength to refuse his wife, who was thus afflicted. He could have refused her with strong words expressing impossibility, but he was not as spiritually strong as Vidura. So we are actually going into the third talking point, but here, staying on the talking part, obviously Diti is afflicted by this desire, and because of that, the contamination has increased, and she is talking in sweet words to please her husband, because she has seen all her sisters. It's mentioned elsewhere in this chapter. Uh, she has seen her other sisters married to Kashyapa Muni having children, but she had not yet got any child. So she was obviously desiring, or she might have been envious of her other sisters, and she was desiring children also. So staying back on the talkative part, in the what kind of talks are to be promoted, or what is the right way of talking? In Bhagavad Gita 17.15, it says, Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priya hitam cha yat swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchyate. Or austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literatures. Swadhyaya, Abhyasanam, so reciting Vedic literature. We see here that Diti is talking, but it might be pleasing right now to Kashyapa Muni, but are they satisfying all the characteristics of a good speech here? Truthful, is the speech truthful? Who defines the truth? It says in the later part of this verse, reciting the Vedic literatures or from the Vedic literatures. That's usually the truth. And beneficial, is it beneficial? Beneficial is in two terms. Benefits, it will benefit her in the short term, but will it benefit in the long term? And it's mentioned in the previous verse, 15th verse, that DT Srila Prabhupada writes that in the purport that DT knew that this was an inappropriate time, and therefore Kashyapa Muni might reject the proposal. So she had some kind of she had the knowledge. She knew that this was a possibility. So, and obviously she knew the consequences. So was it beneficial from a long-term perspective? Probably not. And obviously we know the consequences that happened later on, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, and the sons that were born were not of demoniac nature. And the Last part is not agitating to others. It could have agitated because Kashyapa Muni was meditating and he was in a trance at that time, and wanting to get to do this may have agitated him. So looking at these different characteristics of a austere speech or a recommended speech, maybe all of them were not satisfied. And that is because she, as Srila Prabhupada writes, that she was afflicted by the lust of sex desire, which increases the sinful contamination. And the third part is, Srila Prabhupada writes, is about comparing Kashyapa Muni to a pure devotee. Based on these texts, obviously I or we cannot judge, but based on these texts, Srila Prabhupada is writing that Kashyapa Muni was not a pure devotee at the level of Vidura, because Vidura is questioning here, or is the listener. He is being identified, he's being called a hero, and Srila Prabhupada writes hero because he is a pure devotee, while Kashyapa is not. And because he's not, Srila Prabhupada writes here, Vidura is addressed here as a hero because no one is stronger in self-control than a devotee of the Lord. It appears that Kashyapa was already inclined to have sexual enjoyment with his wife, and because he was not a strong man, he tried to dissuade her only with pacifying words. So this statement that only a devotee can control Vidura is addressed here because no one is stronger in self-control than a devotee of the Lord. So why is that? So we have to understand that Kashyapa Muni might have been meditating in trance, and it appears like he was in a impersonal conception, meditating on the Brahman and trying to follow the Vedic path, the Karma Kanda path maybe. And because of that, he is not as strong as Vidura, who is a pure devotee. A pure devotee means they have completely given their life. They have no material contamination and completely in Krishna consciousness, meaning they have nothing material in their consciousness. They are completely aligned with Krishna. That is a pure devotee in bhakti. And because they are completely aligned with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or Krishna, and Krishna is, there is nothing material about Krishna, 100% spiritual. And there is also reciprocation. So we have to understand the difference between devotee and a spiritual practice of an impersonalist. A spiritual practice of an impersonalist, when they are meditating and on the Brahman, or they may be following the Ashtanga yoga process on their own strength, this is compared to the negation of the material miseries. So for example, if I am hitting someone, constantly hitting, and then suddenly I stop hitting that person, and that person experiences happiness, bliss, because he got stopped. There is no more pain that's coming to him. That's like a big improvement for him. So that's one happiness. That's the Brahmabhuta, Prasannatma. So he becomes, as Krishna says in the 18th chapter, Brahmabhuta Prasannatma. Na shochati na kankshati. So at that point, they become happy because there is no more hankering and desires. So that is a level of happiness. But that's just negation of material miseries. But what about actually getting some pleasure? So that is the spiritual pleasure that a devotee experiences, which is not experienced by an impersonalist, because there is no spiritual connection with a spiritual entity. For a devotee, there is a spiritual connection with the Supreme Lord. And with that spiritual connection, there is reciprocation. With the reciprocation, there is transcendental joy, transcendental bliss. We all, this whole material world is designed in such a way to, because it's in 15th chapter, Krishna says it's a reflection of the spiritual world. So we get the happiness here, and we can understand that this happiness is far greater than negation of miseries. So similarly, when there is a reciprocation of spiritual bliss, when there is spiritual bliss, it is far, far greater than the negation of material miseries. And this has been proved in many, many different ways. There are so many pastimes. Even in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Haridas Thakur is mentioned, who was approached by a very beautiful prostitute who was not even his wife, and he was able to overcome that situation, and he converted that prostitute into a devotee. But here, Kashyapa Muni is not able to resist the inclination of his wife. So with that, I will stop here and quickly summarize. We talked about the verse number 15 and 16, where Diti is approaching Kashyapa Muni at an improper time to have sex with him and to have children. And here it's mentioned in the 16th verse that Diti was afflicted by contamination of lust, and because of that, she was poor and talkative. So we talked about the affliction by contamination of lust, about Kama Vega. That Kama Vega is a universal phenomena in any species of life, in any planet. And Kama is generally victorious unless one is able to overcome that Kama with the spiritual strength. We discussed this in relationship to the Nectar of Instruction, or Upadeshamrita. Srila Rupa Goswami talks about it, etan vegan yo vishaheta dhira. One has to restrict these vegas. The next point we discussed was poor and talkative. The talkative part is also discussed in the Upadeshamrita, Nectar of Instruction, as prajalpa, where it is compared to the croaking of the toads by Srila Prabhupada. We also discussed what proper talking is, as defined in Bhagavad Gita 17.15, where the 4 different characteristics of talking are mentioned, which are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, not agitating to others, and at the same time based on Vedic literature. And the last topic we discussed was Kashyapa not being a devotee, and the difference between a devotee, even though a devotee is also practicing spiritual consciousness, and a non-devotee practicing spiritual consciousness, and impersonalist or a yogi. But the difference between them is that a devotee is connected to something spiritual at a personal level, but a spiritualist or an impersonalist or a yogi, they don't have that connection. They are simply trying to negate. And because of that, they are not as strong as the devotees, with examples from Chaitanya Charitamrita as Haridas Thakur. So with that, I will end here and invite any discussions that may be there. If nothing,
please accept my humble obeisances. I'll go to Prabhupada.
Yes,
I'm sorry, I was a little in and out of the class today. So if I have missed a point, in the context of this question, then you can let it go. But, this point about Kashyapa not being a devotee, how do we understand that the Lord appeared in his family, to Kashyapa and Aditi as Vamanadev, right? How do we
Yes.
understand that?
Yeah, but okay, so if anybody else wants to answer, that's good. But my understanding is that there is no such relationship, because we see that the Lord appeared in the family of like it has happened multiple times. A devotee, for example, has been born. Sorry, Prahlad Maharaj was the son of Hiranyakashipu, and he being a pure devotee of the most demoniac father in the scriptures, how could that have happened? Somebody may ask that. And so similarly, I would say that this is also in that way. There's no such relationship. It's just his pastime. He chooses where to come.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept my
Yes,
humble
Sanjana.
obeisances to all glories to Srila.
Please accept mine.
Same question that Varshana Mataji is asking to support her point. We see Kashyapa Muni is teaching Didi the Payovrata later on. That is, how to please the Lord.
Yes.
So,
few months
Kashyapa Muni is an exalted personality, from that and from other pages of Bhagavatam, we would think he is a very exalted personality. How can he not be a devotee of the Lord? I mean, the same question we can ask about Daksha Prajapati, because he pleased the Supreme Lord, and Lord manifest to him and give him blessings and all. But can we call him a non-devotee? So that is what I just thought. These characteristics, devotee characteristics, are more than the. So Hare Krishna. That's all, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Yes, good points. And as I discussed, so spiritual practices can be of different types, which is impersonal Brahman realization is one practice, practice of yoga is another practice, and being a devotee is another practice. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna constantly and very clearly states the superiority of bhakti over the other processes. And it's very clear. Srila Prabhupada is himself writing that Kashyapa Muni was of the former type and not a devotee. How can it be? I don't know.
Thank you for the very nice class, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, everyone. We'll stop here. We are a few minutes over. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo. Hare Krishna.